Origin just wants to reaction. This is US Navy's wild plan to battle China, but I think it changed the title to US Navy's wild plan to rebuild and modernize. But on task and purpose. I don't know why he changed the title. I'm pretty sure I remember watching the title. Yeah. So there was already a title about US Marines wild plan, which is like US Marines makes sense, but that is like amphibious things, right? And they're trying to basically do this guerrilla warfare type of way. I don't know, like small teams and everything. Yeah, that would work. And taken from like Ukraine versus Russia thing, yeah, that would definitely work. What Marine is trying to do. Marine is not the main force, right? So that makes sense. US Navy is the main force. It's about the Navy and anything naval, right? So what is their wild? I don't know, like multiple what is it called? Ford class carriers and things. Just like increase all that. Like, are they going to replace F-18s with F-35s any soon? F-35Bs? Because I feel like it's time, right? F-18s are like, I don't know, like decent. It's like, I don't know how to say that. Like, nobody knows which kind of like a truck, like a proper big ass trucks are good to basically haul lots of load and lots of tonnage. Nobody talks about that because people talk about Ferraris and things, but those trucks are important. Nobody knows that. I feel like F-18 is something like that. It gets used a lot. It is important a lot, right? Nobody thinks of that really good somehow. They don't like how it looks and everything. I don't understand that. F-18 is great because I only see like effectiveness, and F-18 has been really effective so far. But yeah, this is going to be interesting. Let's do it. Remember, if you like what don't forget to subscribe. That way you can help this channel by helping the algorithm. Recently I've been watching like video game videos and other type of videos as well, and like again, algorithm has gone crazy. How many people choose to click on the video remains the same, but somehow I think YouTube is like recommending less and less video recently, which is like, I don't know. YouTube, I don't know, still algorithm can understand the reaction element of things. Like there can be channel with like various topic or something. YouTube algorithm still doesn't understand that. So by liking and commenting or whatever, you can really help out this channel. And yeah, if you haven't seen those US Marines wild plan to like tackle China or whatever, that videos I did a reaction to it. If you haven't seen that, check out the link in the description or in the end of the video end card. Then yeah, let's do it. Whoa, there we go.
States and China are smack dab in the middle of one of history's largest naval arms races. In 2020, the Chinese Navy surpassed the US in overall number of warships for the first time ever.
Yeah.
On the other hand, the US fleet is more advanced and has far more tonnage. But US naval leadership has seen the writing on the wall and attempted to kick the military-industrial complex back into high gear. So what new warships, weapons, and tactics will they acquire over the next decade? And will it be the correct ones needed to keep China in check? If we want to understand the US Navy's plan to modernize, it's worth looking at its two greatest influences. Alfred Mayan was a United States naval officer and strategist who wrote the 1890 book, The Influence of Sea Power Upon History. It's basically the naval Bible now. In it, Mayan argued that the control of maritime trade routes were crucial for the success of a global power. He recommended maintaining naval bases and refueling logistics stations all around the world. He pointed out that control of
we saw the Houthi things, basically this, like how that can cause problems. And I think it will cause problems. It's like economy is like, global economy is like really slow moving thing. Like a ripple takes time to take an effect. This Houthi thing will have an effect few years from now. All the ships is like trying to do the long route will have an effect.
Strategic maritime choke points have had a decisive impact on the outcome of wars throughout history, all the way back to 400 BC. We can easily see today how his theories were extremely influential on how the US Navy evolved. Then there was Sir Julian Corbett, who was a British naval historian and strategist who published some principles of maritime strategy in 1911. It's like the Torah of the Navy. That analogy doesn't work. Corbett was in some ways the counterpoint to Mayan. He argued for avoiding decisive battles, engaging in raids on the enemy instead. Critics of Mayan believed that he had an overemphasis on large, heavy-armed battleships. They believed the smaller, more agile Navy could be more effective at sea denial and disrupting larger fleets through asymmetric means. Sir Corbett placed more emphasis on limited warfare and coordinating with other military branches, even making use of diplomacy. The naval problems facing Mayan and Corbett over 100 years ago are many of the same ones faced today. Their works have influenced national naval policies around the world for over 100 years now. Anytime the US Navy has to modernize to face a new adversary, there's going to be debates about three main things. First, what is the correct number of warships we should have? Second, what is the correct type of warships we should have? And third, what is the
Correct number? I don't know, the maximum you can have, maximum you can afford to, I don't know. I'm pretty sure, like, there's going to be a limit when it comes to military spending, right? There's like, okay, anything more and we come to trouble. Doesn't matter how booming our economy is. I guess that number.
the correct mission for these warships? Before we can determine the possible answers to those questions, let us first diagnose the problem.
I think he means like let's say 5 types of ship which we should prioritize more compared to other. That's what he means. Obviously, like there's going to be a limited budget, but yeah. I mean, US has always been that kind of mentality, like power by numbers, right? So I think they probably go through that route. Whatever has like more effectiveness, probably smaller, but it's like a lot of it.
Currently, the US Navy only has about 290 vessels compared to China's roughly 370.
Ooh. Aircraft carriers 12. Light carriers, no. Submarines. Wow, okay.
China is expected to hit 475 ships by 2035. Believe me, I'm almost dumb enough to make a unidimensional analysis that more ships equals better, but I'm going to resist every urge to stop there. Because we can see the US has 11 aircraft carriers and 14 ballistic missile submarines, which form the backbone of a blue water navy. Meanwhile, China has less than half in both those critical categories.
I mean, come on.
When added together, the US Navy has about 4.6 million tons of displacement, or about twice the amount of.
I mean, I get it. I think China's whole deal is that not flexing power at the US or something. Their more vision is like more closer areas like Taiwan, Japan, and things like that. So they're focusing more on like destroyers and smaller ships and things like that. While US is obviously like a lot of aircraft carriers, a lot of like ballistic missiles to have like global dominance element to it, right? Like we can send our aircraft carriers 2-3 of them, and that's enough. That might be army of its own type of way. Like imagine like 4-class aircraft carriers. That one thing alone has a lot of power.
Tonnage as the Chinese Navy. We'll see later on that comparing a Navy's power based solely on tonnage and ship hulls doesn't give you a clear picture of their actual abilities, but yes, heavier ships typically translate to more weapon systems and capabilities per ship. But there are many other variables that are just as important for us to weigh. One consideration the US Navy has to make in terms of mission that the Chinese don't have to worry about right now is that they have a global footprint, which stretches their resources thinner. According to this article from WarOnTheRocks.com by Mackenzie Eaglin, the demand for US naval forces outmatches the supply, because in 2015 they were reportedly only able to meet 44% of the requests made on combatant commanders around the world. Leadership claimed they needed an additional 150 extra ships just to meet those demands. Now, Mackenzie goes on to write that in 2016, Navy combatant commanders testified they would need a fleet of at least 80 attack submarines to fill all these requests. So currently the US Navy only has about 53 attack submarines. It would take a decade or more to meet this requirement. So we can of course argue that the Navy is essentially just trying to create the case for why they should get more funding and resources, but the lack of ships is somewhat of a concern. This is where the question of mission comes into the picture. Some would ask if the Navy needs to avoid trying to answer every single humanitarian and security call that's made of them. Should the Navy be trying to dominate and control the seas like Mayan suggested, or should they share its responsibilities with allies and use a more diplomatic approach like Corbett suggested? I'm oversimplifying it here, of course, but I think
Corbett one makes more sense than the first one. And I think US has tried to do the first one a lot, but only thing that would translate to sure you have like global dominance by your own, but like you spend a lot too, right? Your economy is going to suffer as well. Be more diplomatic, right? You have ally countries, right? If you can use diplomacy and like twist the arm and do whatever job you want to do, but with your ally, why spend a lot of resources trying to do yourself, basically, right? You don't have to like dominate all, sea routes and things like that. You can have allies do some of the things. It's like mutual interest and things like that.
These are useful ways of understanding the Navy's predicament. Sir Corbett reiterated Clausewitz when he said, quote, "Military action must still be regarded only as a manifestation of policy. It must never supersede policy. The policy is always the object. War is how we obtain the object, and the means must always keep the end in view." What this means, I think, is that our Navy's force structure should be built and designed to protect our
Basically, don't turn into Prussia. That's that thing.
national interest or achieve specific
It's a tool,
diplomatic
remember
goals.
that. That's kind of thing.
Currently, that goal seems to be aimed at deterring war in the Pacific. At its peak, the US Navy operated 6,700 ships at the end of World War II. In the 1980s, the US had about 550 warships, while naval planners advocated for a 600-ship Navy with 15 carrier strike groups. During the 1980s, old Iowa-class battleships were recommissioned, and the Navy reached a recent height of 594 warships in 1987. However, when the Soviet Union collapsed shortly after that, it appeared there was no longer a need for such a massive peacetime Navy, and the force has steadily declined to 290 today. Mahan's theories about a large, decisive battle might not be relevant today, but his push for maintaining a large Navy has endured. Then, in December 2016, a major turning point happened when the Navy released a force structure goal that called to reverse this trend of a smaller Navy. They aimed to increase the fleet to 355 ships in one version of the plan by 2042. The Congressional Budget Office found that they plan to retire more destroyers, cruisers, and submarines than they'll commission over the next 10 years. What this means is that they'll be down to 285 ships by 2026. But then, this trend would reverse after that, and the Navy would start to grow in their numbers. Part of the reason why the Navy modernization can be controversial is because of how long it takes to build warships and the enormous amount of resources, materials, and money that they cost. For example, it takes like 5 to 6 years from the time when a destroyer is ordered to when it's finally commissioned on the active duty in the fleet. That's about 5 times longer than it takes to build your average Abrams tank. This means naval planners need to plan far into the future, and if they're wrong, it's difficult to turn things around midway through development.
Yeah, that is so important. Navy is like, it's literally the largest thing, right? You can't mess that up, right? Because you can't just suddenly change plans. Trying to build an aircraft carriers or like submarines or even destroy, like where you want to go, you need to know that. It's like a gamble, isn't it? Hindsight is a great thing when things has happened. Captain Hindsight from South Park, that makes sense. But that doesn't work in real life because, you don't know where the fuck things are going. Right now, something might feel strongly like this is where all the thing is pointing. But when the time comes, or even like the midway point, you realize, oh, fuck, we made a mistake. You can't do nothing now, right? So, yeah, future, just by making certain decisions, future might look slightly weaker for the US or really stronger for the US. Who knows? But yeah, that is, to me, like, US has made enough enemies and US has created enough monopolies around the world that a lot of people will try to take a lot of different elements from US, like China and countries like that. You need to have a strong Navy. Navy is everything, right? Most of the earth is water. And if you're not dominating water, you're not dominating nothing. So Navy is the one thing you really need to think about.
The Navy periodically creates these 30-year plans to help view procurement far into the future. There was a recent report in Bloomberg. They wrote an article that called into question how corrupt the Chinese military is and claimed through some unverified anonymous sources that their missiles were filled with water. Since then, it appears that the accuracy of these claims are questionable at best. Now, while it's true China's rocket forces, they face corruption, but this problem is not unique to them. There's also been a major corruption scandal inside the US Navy, where one defense contractor nicknamed Fat Leonard overcharged the Navy for more than $35 million. In return, he bribed scores of naval officers in the United States Navy with over $500,000 and ladies of the night so he could get favorable contracts and intel reports from them. I find it fun to take jabs at our adversaries and to make cracks about China's.
I mean, there's a reason why there's an organized crime in the US. There's a reason why there was Al Capone. Of course, there's going to be some kind of corruption in US. But the whole point with democracy is any democracy, India, US, that whenever something like this happens, right, there's always a chance somebody might leak it, and there will be like a public condemnation, and like people will, oh, this happened in China. Just to protect the China, basically Russia too, I'm guessing, just to protect the image, they might like suppress it. What happens is like people don't realize some shit happened, right? So anybody else is doing corruption, we're gonna keep doing it. Like there's no fear factor at public level, right? Like people are gonna get caught and things like that. There's no awareness to the people like this thing is happening. So, and also like the element, like I think what happened with Russia is like the yes men's basically just out of fear of Putin, they just told him everything's working fine, and basically turned out it's not. Something like that could happen to as well in China because of not being democracy, right? So in China that could also happen. So that's what democracy is really tool. Look at the A-10 Warthog, shot down F-22 in a practice, but they still released it. A-10 even has the image on it. If anything, like any other country is like, oh, this is our like prize possession F-22, we can make this public. US don't care. It is what it is. Democracy, right? That's why a lot of people even say like, you're talking about conspiracies. You're saying like US government is keeping aliens. Nobody can keep their mouth shut. A simple secretary would be a whistleblower at that point. Oh, we have aliens or something.
Its corruption and the inferiority of some of their weapon systems. At the same time, it would be unwise to discount their abilities or think that they're not a threat to Taiwan. U.S. naval leadership is concerned enough about the threat
closer,
that they're
so they're
even
going to be
creating
larger
an entirely new strategy to address the issues that we've laid out so far. Because the Chinese military has explicitly built their naval forces around the concept of killing American aircraft carriers. They've invested in a network of land-based ballistic anti-ship missiles that can strike out to 3,000 kilometers. So in response, the US Navy's new model calls for a more distributed approach to naval firepower with new missiles across more platforms. And the return of a ship class that the Navy hasn't really widely built since the 1980s. I'm talking about the frigate. As the Cold War ended though, the US Navy didn't see a
I think US is like a really powerhouse technology, so they don't need to go smaller. They need to find out ways to defend against like incoming missiles, against like aircraft carriers, right? Ford class aircraft carriers, like 2-3 of them would be just enough. Like US mainland might as well be at the Taiwan. That's how powerful they are, right? So you need that power. You can't just like downsize and make them smaller, thinking like if they're smaller and like distributed, there is no attack. Like US is powerful enough at a level that they need to think about defense strategy and keep the things heavy, right? Just to like flex and show the power. Sometimes psychological warfare is enough.
Need for a peacetime Navy to build these smaller ships. But in 2017, frigates were back on the menu. They were back in style when the Navy announced the FFGX program to bring back this blast from the past. The Navy needs more ships and they need them fast. So the FFGX program had an extremely short timetable. The project shopped around the world to modify an existing design instead of designing something from scratch. The project went from the FREM multi-purpose frigate as the base design. It's been built since 2007 by Italian company Fincantieri and the French firm Naval Group. The FREM underwent significant modifications to become the United States Navy's Constellation Class.
US don't have like ship-making companies? Come on, how's that possible? Why do you need like, French and things like that?
This is America's new, next-generation frigate, and they plan to manufacture about 20 of these. The Constellation FFG-62 class packs a punch. The whole point of the Navy's new distributed firepower concept is to spread offensive capabilities throughout the fleet. So the new frigates will be armed with 32 of the Mark 41 VLS missile cells for launching Tomahawk cruise missiles, enhanced Sea Sparrow missiles, or your standard series missiles. The Center for the International Maritime Security wrote this great article by Dmitry Flippioff on the new distributed warfare theory, which is now regarded as the superior chef's kiss method. It's a pretty drastic departure from essentially a millennia of historical naval battles, which were often characterized by decisive clashes between very concentrated fleets. This distributed warfare reminds me of Sir Corbett's concept about raiding tactics against enemy forces. Now, one of the main ways we try to quantify our Navy's power is by counting the number of vertical launch systems that they have across the fleet. Launch cells are kind of the cornerstone of modern naval power, like how cannons were in the past. They can carry air defense or long-range strike missiles. In 2021, the Center for Military Studies published the total numbers of VLS cells in use within the US military and 14 NATO navies. This Excel sheet style breakdown right behind me here, you can see that the US Navy has the most with a total of 8,646 vertical launch cells. And this Forbes article written by David Axe estimates that the US has about 10,196 ship and submarine launched potential missiles. Under the Navy's new plan, by 2053, they claim they would have 20% more missile launch cell firepower. They wouldn't all be loaded with offensive missiles, though. You need to account for the fact that there's going to be a mix between defensive and strike capabilities, but it's a good place to start with assessing naval power. Our European allies bring a combined extra 2,328 additional missile launch cells to the table. Meanwhile, China's Navy has estimated to only have about 4,168 missile launch cells, but that estimate is from 2021, and their capabilities will be closer to...
Not gonna lie, like UK, France, all of them, like UK has 700, France is like near 300, Denmark being like close to 250. China just only 4,000. Like China's making a lot of jumps, especially if you compare like older powers, like I just said, like European powers. They are like very small compared to them. Obviously, compared to US, it's not, but still.
4,500 to 5,000 today. I think this metric is far more important to consider than the number of total ship hulls or tonnage. I should also point out that some missile cells are larger than others, and there's a good argument to be made that looking at any single factor like launch cells is a bit reductive. We should look at the Navy's capabilities and strategy as a whole to better appreciate the situation.
Not to mention, how do you know? China is not some open thing you can just go and investigate, right? So China might have like hidden things that nobody knows about. Who knows if 4,000 number is even accurate? What if they have like more, but they don't want you to know? China is one of those countries that can keep things hidden. Like look at the internet. In this, like they have like one of the largest population. Together with India, it's like, I don't even know what is like 1.2, 1.3 now, right? That billion of people, and they can still constrict the internet there, right? Google, YouTube is not just free there, right? Like nobody can just so they can control things. They can control information. So all this information coming from China, who knows if they're accurate? Who knows what they're doing else that nobody knows about?
Modern naval combat, firing more missiles at an enemy at the same time gives a greater chance of overwhelming an enemy's defenses and scoring a hit. So the more missiles carried by the fleet, the better. One of the current limitations of this missile launch weapon system is that they need to retreat all the way back to shore, then it has to be tied down so that the ship is completely immobile, then special missile reloading cranes are brought in to reload each missile safely. The whole process can take a ship out of the fight for weeks. The Navy is experimenting with rearm at sea capabilities, getting it to work with dummy ammo at the pier, but not in open sea, which would be more difficult. One solution to pump up those launch cell numbers is by adding modular Mark 40 container launchers. You basically slap them onto any deck of a ship to increase their missile firepower. So the Constellation Class is going with tried and tested technologies instead of trying to reinvent the wheel. This is because naval procurement has gotten itself into hot water trying to adopt leap-ahead technologies that promised ambitious, huge new abilities, but arguably fell short, like the zoom wall in the littoral combat ship. More ships means more nodes for watching the seas and
I mean, you don't want something new to complain about, haha, and just like pull the trigger and it's not working. You need to incrementally, improve what you have already. That's how you make, right? You slowly build things to better and better. Obviously, you like on top of technology, completely newer and better is like good, but everything you can just make things from scratch, right? You need to make something that you already have better, right? That's the whole thing. There was a problem with like German engineering, right? Mercedes, BMW, I still remember like, I guess that's not the case anymore. I don't think that's the case anymore. A few decade or two ago, right? Mercedes is great, BMW is great. Of course it was great. But one fucking sensor goes away and it's like it will take a month to figure out where the problem was. Because everything's too complicated. You can't really figure it out. With modern computers, it's becoming easier, I guess.
Skies, which is another advantage to the distributed model that the Navy's going for now. The first ship in this new Constellation Class is projected to roll out in 2026, and cost about $1.28 billion, but as production continues, this cost is expected to drop down to $900 million. That may sound like a lot, but it's a real steal compared to the $2.2 billion price tag of an Arleigh Burke destroyer. I try to keep in mind that comparing cost of that.
I mean, you're talking about a few hundred ships in total, right? So $1 billion is not that compared to how much money US puts into every year in defense. So it's not really that much. You can expend a lot with that.
Vessels, it's a hotly debated issue, so I take all of that with a grain of salt. The other dimension to increasing firepower throughout the fleet is the introduction of the Naval Strike Missile. The NSM replaces the older Harpoon missile that had been the standard US and NATO anti-ship missile since 1977. Compared to the Harpoon's radar guidance, the NSM's combination of GPS and infrared guidance systems are entirely passive. So what that means is that targets get much less warning that the missile's heading their way. The Naval Strike Missile doesn't fly supersonic, but it is extremely agile. It's able to make turns and climb and dive on targets in an unpredictable pattern.
Yep. I think passive just means it can do things on its own rather than relying on something else. So there is no much of leakage, what's happening, where is happening, somebody can pick it up with the radar and things. I'm pretty sure that's the main, right? I know that because in speakers terms, passive is used a lot. If a speaker is passive, it has its own amplifier inbuilt it, something like that. So passive is used that way, it can do its own thing. It's its own thing, right? Once launched, it can just guide itself and things like that.
That's really hard to intercept with defensive gunfire or missiles. The Constellation Class frigates will have 16 Naval Strike Missiles each, giving the nimble frigates excellent over-the-horizon striking capability. For longer-ranged engagements, the US is currently testing the conventional prompt strike hypersonic missile on the Zumwalt destroyers and the Virginia-class submarines. We do know that one test firing reached a target 3,700 kilometers away in under 30 minutes, really earning that prompt part of the name. Even with today's current less-than-ideal force structure, according to the best unclassified research document available about how a Taiwan invasion scenario would actually go down, a 2022 wargame conducted by the Center for International and Strategic Studies predicted that proper use of American submarines could sink up to 90% of China's invasion fleet. The problem is dealing with the combat losses, though. Even in the most optimistic wargame results, the US still lost about a quarter of its submarine fleet and over 2,000 sailors.
China knows this though, right? China can see what people are thinking. So to me, it feels like China might have distraction in play, where US is more engaged or just not completely ready when they decide to do the Taiwan thing. They're not gonna launch an attack at Taiwan when US is just completely ready, I'm just here type of way.
This is why the US military is so focused on deterring a war from ever happening in the first place. But none of this confronts the underlying problem that America's shipbuilding is lagging behind the Chinese. This is a lot more complex of a problem than most people realize. The limiting factor for US shipbuilding isn't actually a lack of shipyard space, heavy machinery, or material resources. It's skilled labor. There's a major labor shortage affecting both public and private shipyards that service the US Navy, and no one's talking.
I mean, that's what happens when you say we don't want immigrants, we don't want people crossing the border. Not everybody want to do labor things. There you go. And obviously China has a lot of labor. Somebody said in comments build the wall. How about not? We need laborers right now.
About it. American manufacturing jobs in general have been on the decline for decades, and it's hit the maritime sector especially hard. This leads to an aging workforce that can't replace skilled craftsmen with trained new talent fast enough. To explain this a little more in depth, I want to introduce you to our researcher and writer, Diego Aceituno.
The Navy has 4 public shipyards, but these are all short-staffed by about 1,000 shipbuilders, and private shipyards are also struggling to meet personnel demands. Apprenticeship programs help, like how Huntington Ingalls, which is one of the largest shipbuilders in the country, is having their 1,200 master shipbuilders impart their 40 years of experience to younger apprentices and journeymen, but no national apprenticeship standards exist for shipbuilding, and each company does their work differently. Shipbuilding is a complicated industry that can't be automated anywhere near as much as you might think, so it takes actual experienced hands to build combat-ready ships that won't fall apart during wartime or rough seas. But this tiny workforce has to split their duties between building new ships, along with maintenance of existing ships, upgrade projects, and decommissioning retired vessels. You'd think retiring a vessel would be as simple as recycling it, but it's a long, carefully planned process.
Yeah. See, whenever I think of US and military, it's like they'll think of everything cost effectiveness and all, think about it too deep. But when it comes to military, US pours money. Why are they not doing similar with this? Like, this is crucial for the US Navy against fight against China. Before it was Soviet Union, now it's China. So they could, like, I don't know, like raise wages for the people who want to do the skilled labor and just want to go into this field, right? Or give some, I don't know, like subsidies or whatever. Give some lucrative things that people are like, oh, I want to do that, right? I hear about people crying all the time. There is no job in US now as well, like where things like this exist. I don't know, make this lucrative for people, right? Make this so people go in this field in the first place. So you have like more skill. I mean, US and logistics is like great, right? So US can think of it like how to do this. If you're great at logistics, which means you can like think about things branching out ahead, right? What to do now, how to do things, so a decade from now certain places are filled with different type of like skilled worker and things like that. I don't know, you can think that, right? I mean, there's many TikTok videos of the now newer generation of people like, oh, I can't afford this, I can't afford this and this and that. Make things like this, which is like more important, more lucrative than basic jobs. I don't know.
And dividing a small workforce causes major delays, cost overruns, and accidents. During fiscal year 2022, only 36% of ship contracts were finished on time, and that's down from 44% the previous year.
And where is production happening? At its peak, there were 14 shipbuilding locations in America. Today, there are just 7. These 7 shipyards are owned by only 4 prime contractors. For comparison, China currently has 20 shipyards supporting their military modernization efforts. But in 2018, the Navy launched a $21 billion initiative to modernize and improve the 4 major public shipyards in the country. The US has also started packaging production contracts with workforce development funding to help kickstart the job market and train a new generation of skilled shipbuilders.
Exactly.
As for actual building of ships, the Navy has presented 3 alternative.
Look, only thing military will do is like when they see there's not enough like skilled labor, they'll just go to some another country, ally country, whatever, and give them the contract. What will happen is like jobs go out of US. The senators and Congress and the people, like public sector people, need to think about this for the people. That's why they're fucking elected in the first place. It's not military's job to think about this. It's like, I bet they're not doing anything, right? Sometimes whenever I see like US videos of these people talking, sometimes I don't even know if they can understand any of this. So most of the time people are not even skilled to be on that sitting on that chair. How the fuck are they going to realize like this is a problem, we need to do something about it? I don't know.
Approaches to Congress to expand the size of the battle force by 2045 for roughly similar price tags. The first approach aims to maximize more large, next-generation surface combatants like the upcoming DDG-X, along with small amphibious ships to support coastal operations. Alternative number 2 goes the undersea route, building more current-generation submarines, along with larger amphibious ships. Alternative 3 expands the size of the fleet the fastest, adding 75 ships by 2045, but obviously requires the most investment of funds, about $32 billion per year. And that's only if the contracts can stay on time and on budget. But there's another angle that the Navy is betting will make up the gap and corner the market on the next big thing, which is unmanned platforms. These futuristic drones and uncrewed vessels are already making a splash as they're introduced into the Western Pacific, and the Department of the Navy plans to have a large and diverse inventory of naval drones within 10 years. In fact, the Navy hopes to have as many as 150 unmanned vessels, augmenting its battle fleet by 2045. I'd love to know what Mayan and Corbett would think of unmanned ships and how that would fit into their analysis. The US Navy faces deep systemic challenges that range from fighting against corruption to trying to convince policymakers that investing more in the future of the Navy is a priority. This has made it difficult to keep up with the raw production numbers of the PRC, but as we've seen, an increase in the firepower, tactics, and alliances can offset that disadvantage. While the Navy and the US government as a whole deserved some criticism for not taking action sooner, if there's one thing the US Navy has always proven, it's that other nations underestimate it at their own risk. So what do you think? Will the US Navy be prepared to take on China? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Follow me on
To me, it feels like even if China had like 20% more naval power than US still would be like a power against China because US is experienced. Experience do matter. But yeah, US has always been like far ahead, much ahead than anything else close to it. China stopped that. China's coming close, way close, right? By number, they already surpassed in US Navy. It's just by numbers though. But a drone thing that makes sense. Only thing like, Neil deGrasse Tyson has been bitching about that for decades now, multiple years now, that only thing can like save you is innovation. Focus on innovation. Focus on like inspiring people to go to like colleges and scientific sectors and even information technology sectors. And nowadays, like new trend is like who needs school? Like I don't know, like school loans and education loans. Again, that's like policy failure, not education problem, right? You can't blame education for that. You need education. That's the modern world, right? So yeah, the more and more innovation happens, the drone like they say, like if like new AI and drone thing becomes stronger, you don't need new ships. Drones would be just enough. So things like that. Well, that was US Navy's wild plan to rebuild and modernize against China. Well done, task and purpose. If you like my next, don't forget to subscribe. And yeah, I'll see you next time.